So what I'd like to show you is my new edition.
As Rockstar Games entered the 7th generation of video game consoles, the acclaimed publisher slowly began to trim down and reinvent its catalog. Rather than providing a wide variety of experiences that each tried to do one or two things well, Rockstar started focusing on leveraging the Grand Theft Auto series' popularity and appeal, and offered a much smaller pool of games that featured similarly open-ended designs. And none of the company's franchises were more primed to be reinvented in this manner than Red Dead. 2004's Red Dead Revolver had been far from perfect. Its decent gunplay and atmosphere had been hamstrung by a middling cast of characters and story, resulting in an experience that wasn't quite on the same level with the rest of Rockstar's properties. Yet, its setting had always struck those involved in its creation as the perfect environment to flesh out into a sandbox, and a great foil to the urban sprawl featured in the rest of Rockstar's franchises. The process of translating this into an actual game would prove tumultuous for Rockstar San Diego, pushing them to the brink as they struggled to recreate the American frontier more completely and authentically than any other studio before it. But when their work finally concluded, the world would be treated to what would become one of the most beloved video games of its generation, and an equally excellent expansion. This is the history of Red Dead Redemption. A year after Red Dead Revolver's release, Rockstar San Diego would grace Sony's E3 2005 press conference with a trailer for a Western game titled Old West Project. Featuring sweeping vistas and a rudimentary day-night cycle, many quickly assumed the project to be a sequel to Revolver, one that would likely release for the PlayStation 3, which had been introduced at the same conference, as well as for Microsoft's then soon-to-be-released Xbox 360. Unfortunately, while Rockstar was indeed interested in bringing their Western franchise to the 7th generation of video game consoles, its next entry would not be releasing imminently. As Dan Houser would explain to IGN in 2010, the Old West Project teaser had been developed by a tiny internal team to show off the PlayStation 3's then cutting-edge technology. Red Dead was on its way to entering the world of high definition, but a strong concerted effort to bring it there had yet to be established at this point. Instead, Rockstar San Diego would make their debut on Sony and Microsoft's new platforms the following year with a decidedly different experience. Rockstar Games presents Table Tennis. An unpretentious simulation of the fast-paced sport, table tennis offered those who picked it up a competent game, one that spoke to Rockstar's technological prowess despite being utterly unlike the rest of their catalog. More importantly, table tennis also served to showcase its publisher's new proprietary game engine, the Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, or RAGE, in action. Developed by a division of Rockstar San Diego, RAGE would go on to power most of the publisher's future titles, with Grand Theft Auto 4 and Midnight Club Los Angeles using it when they both released 2 years later in 2008. For a while, it seemed as if Rockstar San Diego's plans to develop a sequel to Revolver had fallen through, that the Old West Project tech demo had ultimately amounted to nothing of substance. And yet, in February of 2009, Rockstar Games would announce that it was alive and well in the form of a massive open-world game called Red Dead Redemption.
This is the land of opportunity, mister!
As more details on what Redemption would entail made their way online, it quickly became clear that the title's belated announcement came not from San Diego's tardiness, but from Redemption being among the most ambitious and challenging projects that had ever been attempted up until that point.
No one needs to kill anyone, Bill.
Over the course of Revolver's development, both its creators in northern San Diego and its publishers in New York City had become immensely attracted to the idea of expanding it into a sprawling open world. Rockstar, as Dan Houser would repeatedly describe in the lead-up to Redemption's release, was concerned about pushing itself forward and not just going with what sells. Creating a big-budget open-world game set in the Wild West seemed a worthwhile way for them to deal with this creative albatross. But the company was also motivated to do so by the fact that, Up until that point, no other Western game of note had attempted to encapsulate all aspects of their source material, with most only focusing on one part of the genre, usually shooting or surviving the elements, and nothing else. Gun, a Western-themed action-adventure game released a year and a half after Revolver, would come closer than others. In addition to featuring an open-world environment replete with side missions, Gun allowed players to hunt and kill various wild animals, engage in mini-games, such as playing poker and herding cattle, and even featured a rudimentary law enforcement system whereby killing enough people within a town would eventually summon a posse determined to eliminate the player. In many ways, the game was much more in line with where Rockstar wanted to take Red Dead than Revolver itself. But unlike Rockstar sandboxes, which were renowned for being mechanically slick and rife with activities to do, many critics felt that Gun, while still a solid game, lagged behind in terms of polish and the amount of content it offered. Redemption would make up for this. But once Rockstar San Diego started its development around 2006, it quickly became clear that seeing it to fruition wasn't going to be easy. Creating a massive dynamic open world was already a challenging feat, yet where the Grand Theft Auto games had the benefit of taking place in dense metropolises, Redemption would be primarily made up of vast and unpopulated expanses. In order to make these empty spaces feel alive and interesting, Rockstar San Diego resolved to create an extensive digital ecosystem of animals that would populate them, in which each animal would react as it would in real life to any other animal encountered, require finesse and skill to be successfully hunted, and yield unique pelts, meats, and other resources when killed. On top of this, its developers wanted the game's story to have the same level of nuance and moral ambiguity as its other titles. Rather than feature a conventional storyline set in the 1800s about a protagonist unashamedly conquering the wilderness, the team decided to have Redemption take place in the early 20th century and feature a much richer tale, one that explored the death of the West and the birth of modern society. In order to ensure that they nailed the game's setting, they were going to need to research it as much as possible and pull every technological stop available to them, including recording motion capture sessions for the game's characters, both human and non-human. All of these tasks and many, many more, including crafting the complex digital framework that would support their ambitiousness, the Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, turned Redemption's development into an immense undertaking, a reality that would manifest negatively during its creation. In early 2010, the internet would be flooded by a flurry of articles and comments claiming that not all was well at Rockstar San Diego's offices, chief among them being a report by Engadget stating that Redemption's development was severely troubled, and a blog post on Gamasutra by an anonymous Rockstar employee's spouse asserting that the company's working conditions had taken a turn for the worse. Rockstar would respond to the latter, claiming that while the nature of their work was challenging, they cared passionately about the people that worked for them, and steadfastly denied that their working conditions were as bad as reported. In a 2016 lawsuit against Take-Two Interactive, Leslie Benzies, Rockstar North's former president and lead designer on Redemption, would reveal that prior to joining its development, Sam Houser contacted him in late 2009, requesting that he help triage the project. According to Houser, the game had become a recurring nightmare of issues, and it was only after Benzies joined soon after that it would finally begin to shape up. Bringing the world of Red Dead Redemption to life had been a grueling process. And yet, as players would discover when it would finally launch for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in May of 2010, it was a grueling process that yielded a stellar game. John Marston wants nothing more than to put his former life as an outlaw behind him and live the rest of his days with his wife and son. But when his family is taken by the newly formed Bureau of Investigation, Marston is forced to return to the frontier and bring the remaining members of his old gang to justice if he ever wants to see them again. Initially, Marston attempts to quickly and peacefully resolve grievances with his former compatriots, but as he soon discovers, the West and its eccentric cast of characters are determined to make sure he doesn't have his way.
Well?
Oh. Poor John.
There they are! Let's get after them!
As the game unfolds across the fictitious American states of New Austin and West Elizabeth, As well as the fictitious Mexican state of Nuevo Paraíso, Marston is roped into all sorts of missions and side quests that provide an all-encompassing tour of everything the Old West has to offer. Running concurrently to all of this is an honor system, whereby the player earns positive or negative honor based on the morality of the choices they make, which in turn changes the way that the rest of the world reacts to Marston. And taking a page out of Grand Theft Auto, the player will gradually raise a wanted meter the more crimes they commit, resulting in lawmen and bounty hunters coming after their head. However, while all of these features and systems provide a largely grounded interpretation of life on the frontier, Marston still has access to a few unrealistic powers at his disposal to make his life easier, the most notable of which being his time-slowing Deadeye ability, one of the game's very few carryovers from Red Dead Revolver. In addition to its single-player campaign, Redemption also allows players to join one another online in multiple different game modes, including a free roam mode in which multiple participants can form posses and explore the game's map together, as well as more organized, competitive modes set within constrained areas, such as variations on Capture the Flag and Team Deathmatch. Redemption would become an instant classic almost immediately upon its release. The game's open world would be hailed for its deepness, beauty, and abundance of activities it allowed one to do, while its story and characters would be lauded for their nuance and heart, as well as for the ways in which they subverted typical genre expectations. Marston, in particular, would be singled out for his sophisticated personality and emotional journey, with many critics quickly naming him one of the most well-realized video game protagonists of all time.
Is there anything you don't like shooting, Paul?
Well, I ain't met the thing yet, but as soon as I do, I'll let you know. You can even put it in one of them books you read.
Maybe I'll do that. Today, John Marston stopped shooting.
Now, I ain't no literary man, but I don't think that'll sell. People like shooting in them things.
I think you may be right there, Paul.
Less praise would be directed at the game's multiplayer offerings. While most pundits agreed that its many online modes offered a lot of fun to be had, they fell short of being utterly superb. The free roam mode allowed interesting emergent scenarios to occur between rival posses, but was a bit too dependent on player participation to remain engaging, and the other modes tended to respawn those killed a little too close to their opponents for comfort. However, Rockstar would take steps to address some of these issues in the years following the game's launch, and its single-player campaign remained so compelling that it was easy to forget about them altogether. In the months following Redemption's release, Rockstar would continue to support the title with a steady stream of downloadable content and expansion packs. While the majority of this content added new maps, features, and playable characters to the game's multiplayer suite, including the entire cast of Red Dead Revolver, one expansion pack offered something a little different. Rockstar had long wanted to use zombies in a way that would be interesting and different than other games featuring the undead, and had come to feel that the best way to do so would be to put them into one of their existing universes. As Dan Houser would explain in a 2010 interview with GameSpot, the company felt that a game that showcased the confusion and fear of a grounded cast of characters that had never confronted zombies before would be much more interesting than a world already familiar with the macabre. Thus, on the eve of Halloween in 2010, Rockstar San Diego would release Red Dead Redemption: Undead Nightmare, a single-player expansion that sees Marston explore a zombie-infested version of Redemption's world in search of a cure for the necrotic madness that has beset it. Featuring a wide variety of fantastical elements, including damaging holy water, Sasquatches, and the four horses of the apocalypse, yet the same quality of storytelling and gameplay that made the base game so esteemed, Undead Nightmare would be lavished in praise upon its release. Where Redemption provided the strongest expression of Rockstar San Diego's desire to provide a serious, heartfelt experience, Undead Nightmare was the most potent expression yet of its developer's ID. Unabashedly silly, but with the level of quality and attention to detail one would expect from a Rockstar game. In an era when downloadable content and expansion packs were starting to become the norm for games released on home consoles, Marston's crazy zombie epic stood out as a paragon for other DLC to strive for.
But I've never, in all my natural-born days, seen anything quite like this.
Nor me, sir.
In a single swoop, Redemption changed everything. It transformed Red Dead from an unassuming shooter into one of Rockstar's most important franchises. It elevated Rockstar San Diego from a competent developer to one of the video game industry's most talented studios. And it gave Western games an unparalleled champion, a shining star in what was previously a sparse and easily forgotten genre. However, if there's one thing it didn't change, it was the amount of time players would have to wait for the next Red Dead to arrive.